Hey, you old man sitting.
My name is Sue Ellen Lazarus, and I'm the founder and director of the Martha's Vineyard Author Series and Book Festival. We were a little skeptical about virtual events and whether anyone would watch. Would anyone be interested in August in another virtual event? But all 1,000 plus of you are testament to the fact that this was a good plan. Thank you for joining us tonight from all over the country and indeed from all over the world. One of the things that we're most pleased about is that the virtual series has allowed those who couldn't make it to the Vineyard this summer to participate. And so a special welcome to you. We wish you were here. And we wish Erik Larson was here. And we wish Erik and Amor were together. But this is a very good alternative. We're honored and delighted to have Erik with us tonight. Indeed, I shamelessly chased him to get him to participate this summer. He good-naturedly obliged. He's joining us tonight from New York City. And we could not be more pleased to have Amor Towles in conversation with Erik. Amor joins us from up the road in Vineyard Haven. Our next event is Sunday, August 9th, a week from tonight, when we will have a panel discussion about the Supreme Court with 4 well-known court watchers discussing the decisions and inner workings of the court. And finally, on August 13th, there will be a discussion on the Black Lives Matter movement with David Blight and Case Lehman. So please save that date. And you can sign up for both of these events through our website, mvbookfestival.com. Thanks to our sponsors, the Vineyard Gazette and the Chilmark Town Affairs Council. This free event is possible because of the support of many of you who've made generous contributions. Thank you so much. If you've not already made a good gift, please consider it tonight. The donate button on your screen makes it really easy. Your support makes these events possible and helps keep next year's book festival free. And by the way, the book festival next year will be on August 7th or 8th. Fingers crossed. Annie Treitman is our event coordinator. Valerie Rosenberg is our chief operations officer. Their competence is responsible for this event happening tonight. Vince Chimo is our tech specialist. And music was brought to you by Nanawi Vanderhoop and Evan Hall, with engineering by Andy Herr. Thank you all. The series advisory board is our magic sauce. They propose authors, make introductions, and they provide invaluable advice on how to structure these events. Particular thanks this summer to Dawn Davis, Steve Fisher, and George Gibson. Now, some housekeeping. Crowdcast has a number of features that allow us to interact with one another during the event. So you see the Buy the Book square there, the button. Link below. It links you directly to Bunch of Grapes, our local bookstore, where you can pick up the book, The Splendid and the Vile. Please support the author and please support the local bookstore and buy the book. Thank you. Ask a question. That button allows you to do just that, ask a question. It also lets you vote on other people's questions. So look to see if someone else has asked your question, click the up arrow to vote on it so the question moves up to the top. There's also a chat window on the right side of the screen where you can make comments throughout the event. And you can hide this window if you find it distracting. Click on the down arrow in the top right corner of the screen to close it. And yes, indeed, there will be a recording of this event. It'll be available on our website very shortly after the event. It's also available through Crowdcast. A lot of you have asked us about the video from Thursday night's event with Sarah Broom, and that is available now through our website. But tonight, we're thrilled to have 2 of our most popular veteran authors back together. Erik Larson joined us at the 2015 book festival, drawing huge crowds. There, he made the memorable remark that I'll never forget, especially when I'm standing in a book signing line. He said, the last person in the book signing line is usually the crazy one. So I'm very careful about not being at the end. Amor Towles is making his 4th appearance, I believe, at one of our events, doing double duty as a featured author and also as a moderator, and always very brilliant. Erik is a critically acclaimed author and popular historian. Above all, he's one of the country's great storytellers. He's written 8 books, 6 of which became New York Times bestsellers. One of my favorites, as a Chicagoan, is Devil in the White City, the audiobook of which kept me company all the way from DC to Martha's Vineyard one summer. We can look forward to seeing Erik's stories brought to life as a number of his books are being adapted for the screen. Among his many accolades, Erik was a finalist for the National Book Award and won the Chicago Public Library's 2016 Carl Sandburg Literary Award for nonfiction. Amor Towles is a lifelong summer resident of Martha's Vineyard. He's captivated readers with his best-selling novels, Rules of Civility and A Gentleman in Moscow. I believe A Gentleman in Moscow has been on the New York Times bestseller list between the hardcover and the paperback for over 100 weeks. Prior to his literary career, Amor was an investment banker. No one has better conversations than Amor, as he did last summer at the book festival with John Grisham. So with no further ado, and with great gratitude, let me turn it over to Amor and Erik. Thank you so much.
Hello, we're on. Sue Ellen, thanks very much. Erik, great to see you. Sue Ellen, thanks very much for continuing to run an amazing book festival and book events on the island. Thanks for having me back, and particularly because it's an honor and a pleasure to get a chance to speak to the great Erik Larson about his newest work of nonfiction, The Splendid and the Vile. Good to see you, Erik.
Good to see you again, Amor.
Erik, I like to kind of start things right at the beginning of a process. And so what I'd love to talk to you about initially is what is the process like for you to figure out what your next book is going to be? I'd love to kind of know that in a general sense. Like, how does that work for you from book to book to book? You know, after this extraordinary body of work, there's probably some patterns there. And then also I'd like you obviously to talk about how you came to land on this topic, which is, for those who don't know, the first year of Churchill's role as prime minister in England during the Second World War. But Erik, generally, how do you come up with your next idea?
So the glib answer is, I wish I knew. There's no formula. There's no guaranteed process. I am actually in that phase right now, and it's funny. You know, I come up with a list of about 5 ideas that I could live with, you know, for the next 4 or 5 years. Then invariably things happen. Like I'll suddenly be reading the New York Times book review, and I'll see that somebody else just did that very same book. Or trends will occur in the nation that make me think, I'm not going to do that book. You know, everybody's, for example, the 1918 flu epidemic has always been, you know, on my backlist of things I think about doing. Would I do that book now? No. Mainly because by the time it came out, I think there's probably going to be 20 books on the same subject. But you know, it's a process that just often it comes down to I'll be intrigued by something and I'll ask myself, what would that have been like? For example, my book about the Lusitania. You know, what would that have been like to actually have been aboard that ship during that last voyage? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, maybe I can tell a fresh story. The way this book came about was very different than my other books. And I can pinpoint exactly why and how it came about. My wife and I, we had been living in Seattle. Our daughters had flown the coop, and we decided that we were going to move to Manhattan, where I'd always wanted to live, and where I am, in fact, am right now. And when we moved to Manhattan, I had this kind of strange epiphany that may seem like a duh moment to most people, but as soon as I arrived in New York, I realized in a very vivid way that 9/11 was a very different experience for people here in New York than for anywhere else in the world. You know, we had watched this thing unfold in real time from my home in Seattle, and it was horrifying enough. as soon as I got to New York, I realized how vivid and awful the event was, in order of magnitude worse than anything I felt or experienced from Seattle. And the main thing that I felt was that there had to be this sense of violation of having your hometown attacked in this way. I started thinking almost immediately about the Blitz period in Britain. I've been kind of interested in that as well. And I thought, how on earth, given how 9/11 affected us, how on earth did people endure in London 57 consecutive nights of bombing in the first phase of what we know as the Blitz, and then another 6 months of intensifying raids at intervals. And that's what brought me to the book. Not Churchill. My original intention was to find a family somewhere, maybe the perfect, maybe the sort of quintessential London or the typical London family, and write about their experience during the Blitz. And then I started thinking, well, why not write about the quintessential family, which was Churchill, his family, his advisors. So that's how this idea came about.
One of the things, when we first met, one of the things that really struck me, one of the first times we spoke, is that we were talking about one of your books, and you said, well, and I think it was Splendid. Sorry, I think it was In the Garden of the Beasts. And in describing how you kind of came to that project and got delved into that wonderful material in that extraordinary book, is one of the things you sort of said, oh, well, this person really interested me as a character. I couldn't quite find the character I was looking for, and then I found this person. Suddenly then I had my character, and that got me started. And when we were talking about Splendid the Vile not long ago, you kind of used the same term in talking about Mary, saying, my favorite character, of course, is Mary Churchill.
Yeah.
And so before talking about Mary, because I do want to talk about Mary, can you talk about, for you, who's such a meticulous nonfiction writer, where everything in quotations is a quote, something that you have unearthed in an archive. What is it? Why that word? What does it mean to you to have these figures in history be characters for you as you're reading the historical record and beginning to assemble your idea? Well,
maybe it's simply that it's, for lack of a better word, this is what they are. They are characters. They are players in the history of whatever subject I'm writing. And so when I say characters, in no way do I want to imply at all that they are dressed up with fictional elements and so forth. They're simply a way of thinking of them as well, I was going to say characters, as part of the story, the true story that I'm trying to tell. And because of the way I like to do history, I do look for characters. I look for the people that we can hold hands with when we're going through this ordeal or whatever it is that I'm writing about. Mary Churchill is a case in point. I love her, first of all. I think she's my favorite character in the book, and honestly, I think she makes the book. Mary Churchill was 17 at the time Churchill became prime minister on May 10, 1940. She turned 18 before the end of the book. And she's a wonderful character who kept a detailed daily diary of events of her life throughout this period. And as what I found was so typical of a certain upper crust kind of British character, if you will. She was incredibly literate, incredibly articulate, a really astute observer. And I was blessed by when Mary Churchill, her daughter, who survives to this day, when her daughter gave me permission to look at her diary. I was at that time one of two scholars, quote unquote, who had looked at the diary. So this was to me a tremendous thing, because it added a freshness to the book that I was afraid I might not actually be able to find. She turned out to be wonderful. She loved her father so much. She commented on world action, world events in a very smart and very perceptive way. But also, she was, after all, a 17-year-old girl who loved to have fun. And so her diary is peppered with all these wonderful references that really get to the core of what I was trying to write about, which is, how do you survive a situation, an ordeal like the Blitz, like the bombing of the German air campaign against Britain. in one way is snogging in the hayloft, as she says
Right.
periodically in the diary, you know, and she went to RAF-based parties. Another thing that periodically happened is these young RAF pilots, you know, we're talking about guys who are like 19, 20, you know, 19, 20 years old, 21. And they knew that Mary was out there at the Churchill country home, the prime ministerial country home, and with her friends. And so they would fly over at treetop level, buzzing the girls. This was a process called beating up. And the girls loved it. In one case, the pilot actually dropped a letter for her. She was silent on exactly what was in that letter. So, you know, that's an omission on my part, on her part.
I guess that is one of the book is full of surprises. For those of you who haven't read it yet, you think you know information. You think you know the Second World War. You think you know Churchill. You think you know the Blitz. You can set all that aside, what you think, and read the book, because it's full of surprises. And that strain is a big one, not just in Mary, but the pursuit of kind of joy and a love of life throughout the crisis is very prevalent. And you find it, you've uncovered it not just in the figures from 10 Downing Street, but from the people, you know, living the simpler lives, the soldiers, the generals. It's pervasive. You know, people are at their jazz clubs. They're hanging out at hotels late at night drinking. What conclusion did you walk away from, having kind of seen that sort of pursuit of living life to the fullest in that set of circumstances? Well,
it's just that wonderful adaptability of people, even under stress. You know, I think one of my favorite chapters, and one of the most revealing chapters in more ways than one in the book, is about how suddenly during the Blitz, there's a lot more sex going on, and not necessarily between married people. There were a lot of affairs, a lot of sex was going on, and I found that absolutely fascinating. So, and as a matter of fact, there's quite a bit of sex in the book in terms of at least one of the characters. But you know, I mean, it's just that this human ability to adapt and persevere, which really was so striking to me throughout my research for the book.
Going back to the research process for a second, you mentioned the fact that you had a chance to read Mary's diaries, which only one other person had done. I think you've said to me in the past that two things that are related. Or one is that you don't like to use a research assistant of any kind. And secondly, that when you start to dig in the material, you avoid the electronic access of information, and instead you're heading for an archive. And so can you kind of walk us through? You've chosen the idea. You're like, okay, I am going to do
sure
the Blitz. What is that process, and why those two things built into them?
Well, let me walk through it in terms of Splendid and the Vile. So you know, first comes that glimmer of an idea. It's like, okay, I really want to write about how does anybody survive this? And it's like, okay, I'm going to write about Churchill and his family and his close advisors during that first year of his prime ministry. And by the way, it was not my goal setting out to write about the first year. It just happened. It's one of these rare narrative flukes that nonfiction writers never happens to us. You know, writers of novels, I mean, you create your own action, you create your own convergence of storylines and so forth. But the reason it's the first year, Churchill became prime minister on May 10, 1940. On May 10, 1941, three main narrative themes in the book all came to an end on that very day, including, I refer to it as the German air campaign as opposed to the Blitz or the Battle of Britain, because these terms are blurry. They have blurry boundaries. And when I think of the German air campaign, I'm talking about really the whole campaign that unfolded during that period when Germany began at last turning its sights on England. And that German air campaign, the most crucial German assault on England of the war. There were subsequent periods of attacks by the Luftwaffe, but this was the crucial period. That period was precisely that 1 year, from May 10, 1940 to May 10, 1941. So that's the first moment where I sort of felt like I had died and gone to heaven. I said, wow, this doesn't happen. These things come to a close, you know, on the same day. And that's where I started to really feel, okay, I was really hooked. Like, this is what I'm going to do. But then I was immediately daunted by the fact that so many people have written about Churchill, and there is so much out there, you know. And I knew I could not read everything. It would be a fool's errand. I could read literally every day for a decade, and maybe finally get through the amount of material that exists right now. The trouble is, by then, 10 years out, there would have been 8 to 10 new interesting books every year. It's just, I would never achieve the end goal. So what I decided was, I was going to do enough reading to understand the Churchillian landscape, to really get a sense of, just what the big points were, what was happening geopolitically, and so forth. And then I was going to dive right into the archives. And I was going to dive into the archives with the confidence that my question was a fresh question that actually nobody had dealt with in a book dedicated to that one subject, which was that how on earth did they do it? How on earth did Churchill do it? How did his family do it? What was the role of his close advisors in helping them get through that year? And with that question in mind, with that lens, I jumped right into the archives because that's where I feel most comfortable, and that's where instinct tells me I am always going to find something new, provided the question I'm going in with has a reasonably fresh aspect, and that became the case with this story as well. But it was a very good way to sort of avoid getting so caught up in the background reading that the life went out of the story, which is always a danger.
And not using an assistant or a helper in any way, because some of your colleagues, some of your peers do that, and I get why. Why don't you do that?
I don't do it. I do not use an assistant. I've never used an assistant. One time for my book In the Garden of the Beast, I used a translator to translate some letters. I don't have an assistant because honestly I don't trust that an assistant that I would hire would be looking for the same kind of things that would recognize the kinds of things that I am likely to recognize. I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying that when I'm in an archive, it's fun. This is going to sound strange, I suppose. I have no idea really what I'm looking for, but I will know it when I find it. I will know it when I find that transcript of an interrogation of a Luftwaffe pilot, or the last diary of a Luftwaffe dive bomber pilot who was like 19 and lasted for all of like 4 weeks before getting blown out of the sky by the RAF. I mean, when you find these things, they sort of vibrate, and I realize, yeah, this is it. I don't have the confidence that a researcher I hired would have the same instincts.
And you'd also be giving away the pleasure of that moment of finding that kind of thing, right?
This is very true. This is a very, very perceptive point, is that, that's part of what makes this fun. And also, frankly, part of the reason why I avoid using online digital resources to any. I use them, of course. There are some very good websites now, and some, especially things that are actually facsimiles of real documents. I'm not going to knock that stuff at all. But there is something removed in terms of the excitement of it. Yeah, I guess the analogy is, once upon a time, if you were like antique hunting, you would go to some out of the way little shop, and there, in a corner would be some amazing piece of furniture, an amazing painting or whatever, and you'd like, boom, I've got it. Now, it's on eBay. Now everything's photographed on Google, and you search aimlessly, and it's like, oh, show me something cool from this store, and wherever, and it's in a way it's too easy. But in an archive, you never know what's going to come up, because especially when you're dealing with these live documents. When I was working on my book about the Lusitania, one of my favorite moments was when I just called up this file. It said something about code book, and what appeared in my locker. The way the National Archives of the UK work, your stuff comes into a locker, and you pull it out of the locker, and you go sit down. Heavy security all over the place. It's great. It's very interesting. And inside this case that had come out in my locker was the actual German code book that was pivotal to what ultimately happens to the Lusitania. And there it was. This was the code book. And those moments, when you have tactile contact with something really important from the past are something that really sustain you through the work. When you start to feel history vibrate through an object, through a document, it's very powerful.
The one thing that's one of the sort of side pleasures in the book, because you do this great thing, which is delve into the domestic life of the Churchills, and we'll come back to that in a second. But one of the surprises for me was that you do start to loop in the high German command. We do see what their take is, or what they're trying to achieve, and you see, as you mentioned there, a German fighter pilot is a great figure in this narrative. Gives us some fascinating insights into what was going on. How did that unfold? Did you know early on that you were going to include some of the German perspective? How did you get that material? Because I assume you were spending a lot of time in London.
Yeah, a lot of time in London, and loved it too. It was a great place. So the way that portion of the narrative worked out, when you do a nonfiction book, very unlike doing a novel, you have to do a book. Well, you don't have to, but I do. I make a point of doing a book proposal. And so in the course of doing this book proposal, which includes a capsule outline of each chapter, what you would, in an ideal world, hope would be in these chapters based on the reading and the research that you've done thus far. So I knew at that point that I was doing this structuring the narrative through this chapter capsule outline. I knew at that point that I was going to be dealing with the German leadership hierarchy for their point of view on this whole thing. At the time, I really only thought it was going to be Hermann Goering, the chief of the Luftwaffe. It evolved, though, because there's some excellent material out there, to where I do a lot of quoting from Joseph Goebbels' diaries, from the minutes of his, every morning he had a meeting of his propaganda ministry. And there is a collection of these minutes. And I was just like, wow, these are all amazing stuff. And then Hitler comes into the thing as kind of a cameo. I mean, he plays an important role, obviously. And the surprise for me was Adolf Gallant, the German fighter pilot. And I loved what I read of him. He left a memoir. There's a lot of material about him. He was a legendary figure to the RAF. Very charismatic guy. I always smoked a cigar. The only guy who was allowed to smoke a cigar in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt fighter. Also the only German fighter pilot who was allowed to install a cigarette lighter. Cigar lighter into the cockpit of his Messerschmitt fighter. And what occurred to me that here's this guy who's just doing his job, and doing it extremely well, and he was in the Luftwaffe from the very start, when it was a secret project of Hermann Goering, to where the wraps were finally taken off, and to where Hermann Goering persuades Hitler to let him be the guy to finally bring Britain to heel. And so he became my character for describing the birth and evolution of the Luftwaffe, which is a great part of the story, because this was this existential threat to Britain. And so what evolved then was, if it's sort of classic suspense. If we know what the Germans are planning, if we know that Hermann Goering has finally sat down with Hitler's permission at last to do a massive raid against London, but we also know that London doesn't know it, that's suspense. We know what's coming. London does not know what's coming. And all of these characters that by this time are populating the narrative, they don't know what's coming. So it was very important to me to have the German point of view for that purpose, and also just to sort of round out the story. Joseph Goebbels, we know him today to be, of course, an absolute monster, and he was indeed that. But in his diary, he talks at length about his children, how much he adores them. He is this devoted father, which frankly adds to the creepiness. He was also Hitler's primary Jew hater. I mean, these things, how do they all end up in the same diary? And that was something that I just found myself really compelled by, and I really needed to explore as well.
In in the Churchill family, I think one of the pleasures of the book for me, one of the many, is that you have this vision of 10 Downing Street and the, where everything is being run, and those of us who've been to London and visit the Churchill war rooms, you kind of have which are still there, you kind of have this vision of the war being run from this underground bunker, which he didn't love going into, or it doesn't seem. But the role of Chequers was fascinating. So that this notion that for those of you who don't know, the PM has access to this house in the country, and they were going, it seemed like every weekend, into the house in the country. And this sort of almost like this parallel government process is taking place in this bucolic setting, which was really designed as a giant dinner party that would go late into the night with key figures. But can you kind of talk about Chequers and how
okay, so Chequers was a surprise to me. I mean, I knew that he went to Chequers, but as I got into the research, I realized that really, I'm going to use that term again, really Chequers became a character in the book. Chequers, to me, is sort of a living character in the book because it was so important to Churchill to get out there. It was very important for a lot of reasons. One footnote about the house, it was given as a gift to British prime ministers by an American, Arthur Lee, with the idea that being out in the country, the original charter, if you will, for Chequers specified that that no work was to be done at Chequers. This was a place to go to revitalize, to restore sanity, in hopes that the leaders of Britain would sort of be able to essentially rebalance and return to 10 Downing Street with perspective and so forth. Churchill becomes prime minister, and what? You're not gonna work at Chequers, and it becomes essentially his command post and his party house. Both those things, and very, very valuable in that sense because it gave him a very different kind of access to his top commanders and his ministers. 10 Downing Street, everything's sort of hierarchical, everything's carefully orchestrated. You have meetings, you have this, you have lunch, you go to the clubs and so forth. At the house, everybody's sitting around the dinner table and everybody has confidence that these secrets are going to be kept. That's all within what Churchill referred to as his secret circle. And so what evolved was, typical Churchillian day. He gets up at like 8 o'clock and works from bed with a whiskey and water at his side, by the way. But we're talking about a tumbler of water with just a tiny, tiny bit of whiskey, and smoking a cigar, and with his personal secretary there taking dictation. The day evolves. There's lunch, typically with brandy, champagne, and so forth. He takes 2 baths each day, very precisely, temperature controlled and so forth. 2 baths each day. He takes a nap, and then in the evening, that comes the really good stuff. That's when the dinner parties happen, and again, there's lots of booze, and there are like all these people seated around the dining room table. These generals, these foreign dignitaries, and so forth. And these parties just last into the nights. Churchill typically would not go to bed until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, which drove his private secretaries crazy. But this is the kind of day he had. One of my favorite moments at Chequers, actually, yes, this was Chequers, was when he loved to sing. This is another surprising thing to me, how much fun Churchill was to be around. He loved to sing. He loved songs from The Wizard of Oz. He loved them. He loved his favorite song was "Run Rabbit Run Run Run," and he also liked military music. So here's this big party at Chequers, lots of dignitaries, lots of generals, and so forth. Afterwards, they convene in the Great Hall at Chequers. Churchill turns on the gramophone, which has some martial music playing. He is at this point wearing his pale blue siren suit. It's a one-piece jumpsuit of his own design, meant to be pulled on in a hurry. So hence the siren suit in case there's an air raid siren. And over that, he's got his orange gold dragon silk dressing gown. And he decides that to the music, to this martial music, he's going to do bayonet drills. So he gets his big Mannlicher, big game rifle with a bayonet at the end, and he proceeds in the Great Hall at 1 a.m. to do bayonet drills, marching very seriously. He's not smiling, he's not laughing. Very seriously around the Great Hall with this big gun and in this getup, as his guests are just bent over it with laughter. So I love those little moments.
Yeah, it's very humane, and you see, I think it brings to life also these other key figures who were in the decision-making process that helped England survive the war, right? And survive this difficult period. All those figures that he's brought around him.
Yes.
I think if we didn't get to see what was going on in checkers, we would have a colder version of who those players were, and we'd have a less sense of the psychology with which that they gave. You get the sense that their friendship to Churchill was a big factor.
Very much.
Through difficult days and things like that.
Yeah, I mean that's a very good point. I mean, we would have a much colder perception of Churchill without visiting him and without visiting him at Chequers and seeing the impressions of him that people had while at Chequers. It was fascinating how that just became a very compelling character for me. Yeah. I should note that he did go there every weekend until it became apparent to everybody else, but not necessarily to him, that it might just be that the Luftwaffe had decided to target him specifically, and that if he was staying there at Chequers, it was an ideal target for a low altitude attack by some German dive bomber or even one of their fast fighters. And so, with some reluctance, he found what I refer to as the full moon country house. In that period, it was still the case that the full moon provided the best flying visibility for night bombers, night attacks. And on nights when there was a full moon, on weekends when there was a full moon or nearly full moon, the decision was made that he couldn't stay at Chequers. It was too dangerous. So they found a second country house. So then he began going mostly to Chequers, but then also splitting time with this other house. So it was nice way.
Can you talk briefly about just sort of filling out the circle of the angles that we get of the Colville? Can you talk about Colville? And that's an extraordinary sort of source suddenly to be a gift again to historians, it seems.
So John Colville, I love John Colville as a character. He's one of the Churchill's private secretaries. And the private secretaries were this cadre of young men, and they were all young men, really hardworking young men. I think of them actually more as like apprentice prime ministers or assistant prime ministers. They were with him constantly. When they were on duty, they were there all day, from when he woke up to when he went to bed. There's no punching clock for these guys. One of them was John Colville. Colville, like Mary, Colville kept, in his case, against all security rules. Right. He kept a very detailed, covert diary of life at 10 Downing Street. It was literally a daily account. He too was a very, very astute observer, a really exquisite writer as well. And so he kept this diary, which was offered fascinating insights. He's the guy. This is why we know as much as we do about what Churchill was really like, is because of John Colville. But there's a little wrinkle. So I went to the Churchill Archive Center, which I love, and to go through the actual diary. I wasn't able to handle the physical product, but very precise digital images of the entire diary are in this collection. And Colville, in the introduction to the diary, I mean, I had decided that Colville, every other biographer of Churchill has treated Colville as sort of an incidental character. Just quote him a couple times, and he disappears into the woodwork. I decided that Colville wanted to step forward and become a character in his own right. So I decided to approach him differently, not just as somebody who spouts a good quote now and then in his diary, but as somebody who was a flesh and blood character, interacted with the other characters. In the introduction to his diary, he says, this is the diary exactly as I wrote it, and it is. A couple of little things. And he said, but with the omission of trivialities. And so whenever I see trivialities, my radar goes on in full blast. I'm like, trivialities? Well, let's find out what these trivialities were. So one day I'm at the Churchill archives and I decide, okay, I'm going to compare the published version of his diary. It's called The Fringes of Power. It's a great thing. I recommend it if anybody wants to read more about Churchill. It's a terrific read. And again, it's the real deal. It's the actual diary. So I decided to compare the published diary with the manuscript diary to see what these trivialities were, to see what Colville had decided to leave out. And it turns out that what he left out were not trivialities at all. Colville was in love. He was in love and he was suffering because his love was not returned. I mean, he was obsessed with this young woman. To me, that's gold, so.
And it's a very nice opposition to Mary. I mean, you kind of see these two young people in this incredible sort of power structure.
Right, and they interact on occasion.
Through their lives.
Yeah, they interact on occasion. I mean, he didn't think much of Mary initially. Mary didn't think much of him initially. Right. But then as time passed, they came to really start to appreciate each other, which I like too.
One other thing I'd like to ask, and then we'll take some questions from the field, as it were, is one of a nice element in the book is there's a whole field of history around the notion of everyday history. Historians who specialize in bringing out not what is happening at the White House or at the Supreme Court, but what's happening at the shop or in the daily lives of people. And you really bring that to the surface in this book in a wonderful way, because of course everybody's going through the Blitz together. People of all social classes and different ages and genders, they're all going through it, and you bring that to the surface. And the extraordinary thing to me was that the way you got it is through this mass observation diary project. And so can you explain what that is? And that must, as a historian, you must have found that been like, this is the greatest thing of all. I mean, as a compliment to the work you were doing around 10 Downing Street.
Yeah, well, mass observation was incredible. I will describe that in a moment, but I do want to make the point that it was one of myriad sources that went into the mix. Diaries from other people, from all manner of archival materials, testimonials, and so forth. But in terms of day-to-day detail for how people actually coped with the Blitz, it was an incredible resource. Mass observation was founded well before the war by a social sciences organization with the idea to just try to get a sense of what ordinary life in Britain was like on a daily basis. And so mass observation recruited hundreds of diarists to keep just the most quotidian diaries about everyday things. And in fact, one of the things that mass observation advised the diarists they recruited to do as a sort of to hone their observational skills was to take a look at their fireplace mantels and describe everything that was on them. It was that kind of finely detailed sort of personal diary. Along comes the war, and many of these diarists continue to keep their diaries, and they would submit these diaries on a regular basis. And that's where it just became absolutely a powerful thing. One of the diarists who is in this book is Olivia Cockett, who was a Scotland Yard clerk. She was having an affair with a married man. Like I said, there was a lot of sex going on. She was having an affair with a married man, and she kept this really wonderful diary. Hers too, articulate, smart, and it really, I think, tracked how the broader culture dealt and adapted with the Blitz. When the first deliberate bombing of central London occurred, that was September 7th, 1940. Footnote, until then, Hitler didn't want the Luftwaffe bombing central London because he still had hopes that he'd be able to bring Churchill to the peace table. By this point, he had given up all hope of that and was completely frustrated and authorized Hermann Goering to bomb central London. So September 7, 1940, first deliberate bombing of London, terrifying for Olivia, who remained terrified, for a while after this, and describes this terror in a very articulate way. And then one day, she puts out an incendiary bomb that has fallen behind her house. Incendiary bombs were dropped by the Luftwaffe first in order to light fires throughout the city, and that these fires would then be beacons for the bombers that were following in the night. Again, because it was very hard to navigate in this period without light, without moonlight, without fires on the ground. So Olivia puts out this incendiary bomb and becomes a changed woman. She has taken a stand. She has done something. She has put this thing out. And she felt so emboldened that her fear really just went away completely. Her boyfriend, Bill, became more and more of a coward, which annoyed her no end. But the arc of her as a character comes when later in the narrative, she's walking along with Bill, and there is a raid that occurs, and they hear 2 bombs falling. They had a distinctive scream. The Germans engineered it that way. 2 bombs are falling. Bill cries out to her, "Get down, get down." And her reaction is, "Not in my new coat, I'm not." Sort of captures the metaphor. It's a metaphoric, encapsulation of what happened to the common man during that period.
Yep. I'm gonna turn to some of the questions that have been submitted for you, Erik, at this point, if that's all right. One of the questions is about Churchill. What was it in Churchill's background or personality that resulted in his sort of opposition to Hitler versus some of the people who preceded him, who didn't bring the same sort of confidence and bellicose attitude into the confrontation? How do you sort of view
why did he see the threat and nobody, some of the others didn't? Well, first, I can't say that nobody else did, because he had many allies in his sort of covert intelligence operation before he became prime minister, who were really collecting hardcore information about what was happening in Germany. Why was he able to see this and others not? It's very complicated. I could probably write a book. Maybe I will. It's not a bad idea, but I could probably write a book about that. I mean, part of it has to do with character. Also, he's also kind of a contrarian, but also I think a part of it is that Churchill was very well read, also an excellent writer, very well read in history. He understood the grand sweep of world history, but especially English history. And I think that's part of what made him able to sort of perceive that Hitler was not all that everybody hoped that he was going to be. Maybe that's part of it. But also, again, it comes down to character.
Someone's asking about if you could comment on how you think about the relationship between Churchill and Roosevelt.
Wonderful element of the saga. It's probably less like a political relationship and more like a one lover courting another, as Churchill himself sort of conceded later in the game. He said that no lover ever more ardent. I'm badly paraphrasing here. But no lover more ardently pursued the target of his affection than he did with regard to Roosevelt. So Churchill, literally from day 2, knew that the only way Britain was going to prevail in this war was with the full-blooded help of America. Without America's help, he felt Britain could fight Germany to a long, drawn-out, stalemate sort of war. But if it was going to prevail, it had to have U.S. help. And he began a very, very, very astute, very meticulous courtship of Roosevelt from day 1, day 2, that tracked throughout that first year and up to Pearl Harbor, when of course the U.S. did finally come in. Interesting question would be that if there had not been a Pearl Harbor, would Roosevelt eventually have entered World War II? That's speculative history. I have no real idea, but I think he probably would have. Anyway, it was an incredible relationship and led to some very interesting exchanges and correspondence.
it's a great moment in the book when they finally meet, which I won't go into because it's such a pleasant surprise.
We don't want to give that away.
Yeah, it's a great moment. Excuse me. Of course, many people would like to know about what you hope to, or what you think about working on next.
You know, I have no idea. I'm actually at a deeply frustrated point because, like I said, I've had a couple of ideas killed simply because it turns out that somebody else just did it. You know, I mean, literally one idea was really high on my plate. I was really interested in doing as I refer to it as the TikTok, that is the minute by minute, day by day account of what led to the dropping of the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. All the fine-grained details, the characters, everything that happened from April of 1945 to when the bomb was actually dropped. From when Truman became president and receives this letter saying there's something I need to talk to you about from another member of Roosevelt's old administration. I love it. I thought it was going to be a great book. Unfortunately, Chris Wallace just published it. It's called Countdown 1945. So, done.
Now, somebody actually asked you, they said, the language is that, I heard you speak in Chicago, and you said that you become very depressed after finishing a book. What was it like for you to complete The Splendid and the Vile, and how do you feel in the aftermath of this book?
Well,
first, is that right? Is that what you feel when you finish?
First of all, now you know it's a very different story. You have to work in the pandemic. Yeah, you know. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what I was probably talking about was, you know, you get into sort of and you experience this too anymore, but you know, you get sort of a postpartum depression when I finish a book, and part of it's because I know that I have to turn around and face the process of trying to find the next book. However, I have to say that with this book was the toughest book that I've done yet. In part because there was so much material and there was the constant dread that I would make some stupid mistake. And there was also this little voice every single day asking me, what on earth were you thinking, taking on this project? Yeah. And so when this book was done, and because I was in that state, actually working on this book, you know, I actually sent the manuscript out to 3 top Churchill experts. I also sent it to a professional fact checker who now works for the Washington Post, and that was really, really important, may I say, because when that book finally came out, I was so confident that I was right about everything that I was actually able to sleep the night before, you know, which is something that is often not the case. But what I'm leading up to, though, there is that because this book was such a trial, if you will, when I began to hear very positive things from people, when it turned out that, I mean, the reviews were great, the early reviews and so forth, I was just so relieved in this case. I was not depressed at all. I was so relieved. I was so thrilled. It's like, you know, crossing a railroad track just before an unexpected train shoots through. So
you did it successfully. You had mentioned, somebody has written in that they remembered when you were at the Martha's Vineyard Book Festival last, that you talked about the objects when you were doing the Lusitania project, like you mentioned tonight, and you've mentioned Mary's journal. They've asked, are there other like physical objects that have that kind of resonance from you in the Splendid and the Vile project that you discovered or came across or held that brought to life the work for you?
Well, first of all, I think this listener, watcher, attendee is referring to. I talked about a plank from a.
Oh, as opposed to the code book. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, what's the plank?
It was a plank from the Lusitania Lifeboat that was found that an archivist at the Hoover Institute in Stanford just plopped down next to me while I was doing my research and explained to me what it was, and it was like, wow. And the weird thing is that, you know all this stuff happened. right? You know that the Lusitania sank. You know that there was a world war underway as well at that point. But seeing this plank, being able to touch this plank of wood, it suddenly made it all very real, just very real in a very concrete way. Now, with this, with Splendid in a Vial, it wasn't so much any one object, but seeing, for example, the Churchill war rooms, which everybody who goes to London visits. It's a very, very cool, very compelling place. And by the way, Churchill only spent 3 nights actually in the underground war rooms. The rest of his time was in his special fortified apartment above, a place called the apartment known as the Annex, the 10 Downing Annex. But just being able to walk through that space and honestly, just to walk the ground in London, achieved that same end for me. Because there is evidence of the war everywhere, and knowing what happened here and what happened there, and being able to walk past typically the building that was destroyed is, it's not going to be there. There's going to be a modern building there, but what was there and what's around it. It's a very powerful thing just to walk the territory.
One of the questions here is that, I'll read it. You draw so much from personal diaries when doing your research. I'm curious, do you keep a diary yourself? And if so, what purpose does it serve for you? And what do you record in it?
I keep an incredibly inarticulate diary that consists of book ideas, book titles, ideas about things that are happening around me, the pandemic in this case. So yes, I do keep a diary, but it's by no means a coherent, integrated diary like John Colville's. I mean, I wish I were that articulate and that literary, but that's not what this is. Although I do have the advantage that it's also a part sketchbook, so mine's better than Colville's.
Erik, last question from the field is: can you update everybody on the film side of your work? Where are things in development? What do we have the luck of seeing at some point in the years ahead, months ahead?
Yeah, so here's where we are. So In the Garden of Beasts, still under option with Tom Hanks. They fully intend to do this as a film. We had to do, in fact, just signed a force majeure extension, which gives them a little more time to work on the project, owing to, obviously the pandemic. And then there is Devil in the White City, where the current plan is that it be a Hulu limited series. It is no longer expected, at least to my knowledge, that DiCaprio will play the killer, but he is an executive producer, as is Martin Scorsese. So that's on the table as well. Those things are moving their slow way through the halls of Hollywood, I hope.
Exactly.
And then there are other things happening with 2 other books that I can't really talk about. So my theory is that everything's going to come out at once.
We'll cross our fingers. Erik, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for your frankness, your openness. Thanks for writing the book. It's a great pleasure. For those of you who haven't read the book, please do. You're really going to enjoy it. Go to a Bunch of Grapes, of course, to pick it up there, or from another indie for those of you who are outside of Martha's Vineyard. And finally, Sue Ellen mentioned that coming up.
First, thank you, Amor. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Great, my pleasure.
And honestly, if you have not read A Gentleman in Moscow, this is how I first met Amor. I had said, without any knowledge of him or friendship or whatever, I tweeted to the effect that the book really is absolutely magical. And I really believe that. It ascends to something we all strive for. He did it. So anyway, go ahead.
Very nice. Erik, thank you very much. And that's also available at the Bunch of Grapes. So for coming up in terms of the Martha's Vineyard author series, this is the second event. And next Sunday, August 9, the series will host an important and timely discussion on the Supreme Court with 4 court watchers participating on a panel, and you're not going to want to miss that. So please do check in with the mvbookfestival.com for more details about that event. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you are. Have a great summer. Erik, great to see you too. Thanks so much.
Everybody stay well.
Hey, you old man sitting by the lonesome road. It's about time you're quitting. Life's so tiresome low. You're so sad and lonely. Got no family. Just an old man from some old country. You ain't sad, no chillin'. Ain't none by your side. You left all your women. Ain't you satisfied? Don't just sit there clinging to a memory of a love left in some old country. Da 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 ba da 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 ba 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 ba